Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This week's video is going to be about my life and the journey with my visual impairment. So before I get to the actual story, I want to tell you guys what my eye condition is and what they conclude and what they mean and such. So my main eye condition is glaucoma. Is basically eye pressure buildup, liquid inside of your eye that builds up pressure. An example of that is if you guys are on the verge of crying or you're trying to hold back some type of stress or you are stressed, the verge when you get a headache, there's pressure buildup in your eye that is some type of liquid. Normally your eye will naturally drain it as it's supposed to, but mine does not have that capability. So my next eye condition is corneal opacities, and corneal opacities has to do with the cornea because it's in the name, cornea, so corneal opacities, which is a lot of scarring in your eye that causes lighting to not be able to fully focus through. It doesn't send everything through your cornea properly for everything to stay clear. But I also have itty bitty little bubbles, you guys can't see it, that are kind of whitish or clearish, and they cause me to have kind of like a little shade over my eye, especially if there's a bright light in front of me. It causes a lot of glare and it just makes everything look white. My next condition is aniridia, which has to do with the underdevelopment of the iris, which causes light sensitivity and does cause vision loss. So it does explain why I have so much vision loss even with the glaucoma itself. So I am light sensitive, which makes a lot of sense because if you guys know me, I can only see negative colors, which means that I can only see bright colors on dark colors. So for example, if you guys have ever been to Santa Monica, the 3rd Street Promenade has a lot of lights because it's an outdoor mall. And when it is pitch black, all of those lights just shine nice and bright. I'm able to see that. Lastly, I have nystagmus, and nystagmus means that I don't have control over my eye, in simple terms. And I won't feel that my eye is moving, and sometimes it'll move super rapidly. Like if I get blood drawn, my eyes go. Even a lot of doctors don't understand that I have nystagmus, so when they tell me, please look straight, and I'm like, I am looking straight. So because I do have glaucoma and all of these other eye conditions, I also have to take medication so that my eyes work properly, or at least function to the capacity that they're able to. So currently I'm taking 4 sets of drops, 1 set of pills, 2 times a day. So I do go to the doctors quite frequently, even up until this point of being 20, almost 21. Now onto the story though. So when I was first born on April 25th, roughly in the afternoon, when I first came out, everything looked normal. I was perfectly fine and healthy. The only thing that they were really worried about was that I was possibly going to have kidney failure. So for a lot of my earlier years of life, I used to go get ultrasounds every 4 or 6-ish months apart. But 2 months later, everybody noticed that there was something off about me when it came to my eyes, especially my left eye. So I went to the doctors and they took a look at me, and they had concluded that I had glaucoma, and they roughly narrowed it down to however many other conditions that I had. Now when it came to my left eye though, it was more underdeveloped than my right eye. So I'm only able to see out of one eye. And what had happened with my left eye was, because it was so underdeveloped, my cornea was failing. And that means I wasn't able to see out of my left eye at all. So doctors wanted to save my eye as much as possible, and they concluded that I was going to be getting a cornea transplant in hopes of saving it and gaining back either vision, or at least making sure that my eye is nice and healthy. They did a bunch of cornea transplants, but none were working. I cannot tell you how many surgeries I've had. 1, I don't remember because I was that young. 2, every time I ask my family how many I had, they can't even remember because it's that many surgeries. Now, my earlier years of my life, I can't really remember too much. I remember up until the age of 6, and even then 1st grade is a little foggy. But I do know that in my earlier years of life, when I was an infant, I did go to Mommy and Me, which is where my mother met a lot of other parents that had similar situations with their kids as I did. And now some of them are still my friends to these days. After Mommy and Me, I did go and attend the Blind Children's Center from being an infant all the way up until kindergarten in 2006. For my time at the Blind Children's Center, I learned how to do Braille at a pretty young age. I'm not able to tell you what age, but I learned Braille from Rosalinda. Now, when I was younger, I was a little bit more reserved. I was really outgoing, especially like with my friends, people my own age and such. Even though I am really good about talking with adults because my mom and I were always glued to the hip. So her friends were essentially my friends or family. So I got really used to talking to mainly adults more than kids. But I was kind of shy-ish. It took quite a bit of time for me to like warm up to you and talk to you in full sentences and such instead of just nodding and smiling at you. After I graduated from the Blind Children's Center, I became a mentor or an alumni mentor. So I would go here and there and I would, of course, play with the kids because I was a kid myself, so why wouldn't I play with kids? But the older I got and the more I became like an advocate for other people with visual impairments, I started talking to parents a little bit more or just people who had questions for me about my visual impairment. Just something that I really like to do. I like to be able to answer questions that anybody has or make someone feel better about any anxiety that they might have over their kids or just their own life. But when I moved to elementary, I was not one of those kids who cried and stayed on my mom's hip to be like, no, I don't want to go to school, no. I very much liked school when I was younger. So on my first day of school, my mom pulled up to the school and I was like, okay, bye. But she walked in with me because we had to like take a look where my class was going to be so that they showed me the route and show me where the VI room was and talk about my accommodations, all of that good stuff. So my accommodations for elementary school was I was allowed to take breaks and rest my eyes, which normally included me taking naps. I'm roughly only able to read 15 minutes before my eyes get tired, and if I overwork my eyes, again, pressure builds up really quickly and I could lose vision from all that pressure buildups. After first grade, I no longer did that, only because the older I got, the more I was able to read for a certain amount of time. Eventually, I was able to read for roughly 40 minutes, and that's as high as I was really able to go. In first grade, I made friends really quickly, and I only had one friend who was visually impaired like I was, who I was the same age with, same class and everything. But we kind of kept this a secret from everybody. We didn't really tell people that we were visually impaired. I kept this more a secret than she did, though, because she was in the higher bracket of vision. I was kind of roughly in the middle. I couldn't see like too well. I couldn't see like things super far away or a certain contrast, but I was also able to see enough that I wasn't at the very bottom, if that makes sense. And my transition from going to a school that mainly had people with a visual impairment or like other disabilities and a couple of non-disabled students who were totally typical, to going to a public school that was mainstream and only really had sighted kids, and the rest of the VI students were either older than me or just didn't go to mainstream classes and they only stayed in the VI room. So I really wanted to focus on, I want people to know me for me before I let them know anything else about me. Fast forward to fourth grade, because nothing really happened second and third grade. But in fourth grade, I became more of a rebel. I went through a rebellious phase 4th and 5th grade, especially when it came to my academics. I really pushed buttons and boundaries as much as possible because everything that I was learning I had already known. I was pretty intelligent when I was younger for the most part, at least I felt I was. I knew a lot, especially when it came to math, and if I knew how to do the work, I didn't want to waste my time writing everything out and doing it. I would just want to take the tests and move on with my life. But, of course, that wasn't acceptable, so I eventually got in trouble, had to do all the work in one day, turned it in, perfectly fine, did the rest of the work for the rest of the year, but 5th grade came, and I did the same thing again. I was really stubborn, not the smartest kid, in the sense of my thought process. But they had thought that because I had a visual impairment already, they had assumed that I just didn't understand the work that I was doing and that I was probably delayed in my education. So they sent me to the special education class with roughly 3 or 4 other students in my grade during lunch. And I got to eat lunch before the class actually started, but on the first day, they knew already that I just didn't belong there because they asked me a bunch of questions. I ended up going for another month or so back to the class, only because the books that they had in there were actually pretty interesting. Probably the only time in my life that I will ever read a book. After graduating elementary school, I went to Washington Irving Magnet Middle School, which was located in Glendale. Now, I only ever really went to schools for elementary and middle school in LA, or at least close to the LA area, only because my mom wanted to be close to me as possible. My mom does work in the vicinity of where my schools were. Yes, I was one of those kids who had a phone. At a very young age, I got my first cell phone when I was 8, and my mom got it for me because on Tuesdays was get out of school early, and my mom was never able to pick me up early, so she bought me a cell phone so that on Tuesdays I can text her that I'm out of school and that I went to the after school program and that I'm fine, and then she could call me when she was there so I can walk out the door. My mom was all about safety. Now for 6th grade, the only issue that I had was in PE. My first PE teacher that I originally had, he was a sweetheart. He understood that I have asthma as well, and I would only be able to run a certain amount of laps because if I overdid it, I would get sick and want to throw up, and I would get super heated, but I would always try to push myself as much as possible, and he saw that dedication that I had, so instead of failing me, he gave me a C, which was fine by me. But then when I transferred to a different teacher, because my first PE teacher, he was actually an actor, but he had left the school to go to one of his acting gigs, and I ended up having to switch. And my PE teacher that I switched to, he was really nice, but he did fail me, which really sucked because I was close to a full straight A's, which would have been amazing. But he tried doing different things, including having me use my inhaler before class and after class, which didn't help because in the moment of me not being able to breathe was during the actual running. So he changed it up again, and he had me run with my inhaler and take it, but it was kind of hard to take my inhaler as I was running because I always felt like I needed to stop, and if I stopped, it just made me weaker. So I tried really, really hard, didn't work though, and he had me and a couple other students who were failing the class come up to the front, and he had us basically partner up with the A students in the class. Now that didn't help my grade a lot because I still was at an F, the process on how it goes. If you have an A and you fail something, it just drops like the Titanic, but if you have an F and you get an A one day, it'll only go up 2%. Now I still did not make it to my straight A's, but at least I passed PE with a C. So it worked out. But I did go to adaptive PE in 7th grade because my mom saw how much I was really struggling. But adaptive PE was a little too easy for me, but it also was really helpful because in regular PE I wasn't allowed to play any of the sports either because I couldn't physically see anything. Now 7th grade was a little bit more of an interesting year. Not as interesting as 8th grade, but pretty interesting. They mixed up my schedule and my friend at the time's schedule. For math, we were in Algebra 1, but we were in Honors Algebra 1 for 7th graders. But they messed up our schedule pretty bad that we couldn't be in the 2 classes that was needed for the Honors Algebra class. So we were half an Algebra class for 7th graders and then in Algebra 1 for 8th graders. Yeah, it was really interesting. I was also in Reptile Club. I really loved Reptile Club. It wasn't much about touching the lizards, but all the other reptiles I was really fascinated about. My favorite game to play, especially when it came to math class, was, I don't know if it had a name to it, but he would give us different shapes. Like, all of us had the same amount of shapes and the same shapes and stuff. But he would put a picture up on the board of a shape that he wants us to create. And with all of the shapes that we have, we had to use each piece. Couldn't leave one out. And we had to make that shape on the board. And whoever got done first had to prove that they finished. But after they did finish and they got it correct, you would get candy from the candy box. There was one time that I won a bunch of times in a row and everybody was pissed. So. But 8th grade, I joined the honors program, which was called the National Junior Honor Society. And we had to do volunteer work, so I got a certificate close to the end of the year for most completed volunteer hours because I ended up being placed in the PE class with the transfer students from Francis Blen because at the time Francis Blen had closed down for good, so their students came over to our school and they were just another separate school from us and would just take PE class with us. But I ended up having to be in that class. I guess there was no room in like the regular class and my schedule just worked out that way. So instead of being an actual student, we had a new PE teacher and he didn't really know how to work with them. So my friend Hector and I had helped him teach the students different exercises and play different games. So essentially we were assistants. So those counted as service hours according to the school because we weren't supposed to technically be there. But since we were there, those counted. And then, of course, when I would go to the Blind Children's Center, those were also volunteer hours that I was allowed to use. But when I went to grab my certificate, I hadn't known it was for me. We had gone to the library because they said we were going to have the award ceremony, and I was like, okay, cool. Didn't think I was going to get an award. So I just wanted to go and like support my friends if they were going to get any or just be there just in general because I think we were getting free food. And as I was there, they're going down the line, and then the last name that gets called was for most service hours completed, and they go, you know, most service hours completed, they pause for dramatic effect, and they go, Daisy Morales, and I was like, because I didn't know it was for moi. So they were just like, oh, I guess Daisy's not here, and I don't remember his name. I really wish I did remember his name, but he looked around and he saw me, that I was sitting in the middle of the table. He goes, no, she's right there. And he goes, Daisy, and he comes up to me, and he goes, like, they called you up. And I was just like, oh, my name isn't Morales, though. And he was like, it's not, because he had done the certificate for me. He goes, it's not. And I was like, no, it's Rosales. So now it made me think more back to my paperwork that he helped me with. I was like, man, did he fill in my name, Daisy Morales, this whole time? Like, and everybody was okay with this? What? But I went up, grabbed my certificate, and then they printed me out another certificate, and I got that one later on that day. But now I have two certificates, one for Daisy Morales, one for Daisy Rosales. For 8th grade, I had started doing O&M lessons with Miss Araceli because I was really jealous of my friends that were in O&M that got to go to McDonald's, and I was like, wow, I want to be pulled out of class to go to McDonald's and learn how to get there. Jealous. But when I had started O&M, I got a totally different instructor than everybody else did. And we learned intersections. And I had taught myself originally how to use a cane before I started O&M because I was losing vision. I lose vision roughly like every day. I don't anymore, which is great. But when I was younger, I would roughly lose vision either like once a year or like every day when I would have my medication. Because back then when I had medication, it would be 3 drops and a set of pills. Then when I went into middle school, it was only drops, and that was it. So my vision just wasn't doing so well, so I taught myself how to use a cane, got an ID cane at Braille Institute. When I started it, I was a little scared, but it was a good thing that I had joined Mondays for choir, and on Wednesdays I did the youth program, which they taught me how to be independent. They taught us how to like cook, which did not mean that I used any stoves or ovens or anything. Unfortunately, my young self would have been so happy. But no, we learned how to cut things, spread things, clean things, organize things. When it came to like money, we did laundry or learned how to like roughly do laundry. With our imaginations, we learned how to fold, how to make our beds, how to hang things up, etc. But I started O&M, and I learned how to do intersections. My first intersection that I learned how to do was residential intersections, which included 4-way stoplights, 2-way stoplights. Then I moved on to bars and stems. After that, I had learned even harder streets, which were business streets and those intersections. I did that for a whole year. But finally in 9th grade, I was at a faster pace. I did have a different O&M instructor. His name is Vincent Fozzie. He's amazing. He does work at Cal State LA as a professor, which I can't wait to join in his class in the future because my future career is O&M. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But with him, I was at a much faster pace. He asked me what I could see. I was able to tell him what my visual acuity was at that time, which was 20/400. And then the next week, we just jumped to learning how to take the bus. I learned different routes on the bus, which included Starbucks, 7-Eleven. I don't remember anywhere else, but learned how to get there. And then we learned how to get to the Orange Line station. Right after I learned how to use the bus for a couple weeks, jumped right into learning how to use the Orange Line. From the Orange Line, we were going to jump into learning how to use the train, but unfortunately we didn't have enough time to do that. I was super busy in 9th grade. I was in the Special Olympic sports, which we played soccer, basketball, wheelchair basketball. We were going to do baseball, and I tried doing goal ball, but they didn't work out, so basketball, wheelchair basketball, and soccer were our games. And I would play with my friend Kimberly and a couple of other playmates, which was like the special education team, and then we would do like the varsity team, I believe it was. And we had a lot of going away games, so sometimes I would miss O&M, which my O&M instructor was okay with because I was so fast paced and I learned really quickly how to do things. I eventually learned how to be able to get to my house by using the bus, and the thing that really intrigued me about him teaching me O&M and learning how to use the bus was once I did learn the route to my house and I was able to cite it back to him with no issue, including what corner the bus was at, which was like the bus is on the northeast side, on the north side specifically, or it was like on the odd side, not the even side of the street. I was able to tell him the bus numbers and such. So he allowed me to go on the bus by myself. By myself, y'all. I loved it. And don't get me wrong, it's not like he just dropped me off at the bus stop and then just dipped on me. No. He let me go to the bus stop right when I got on the bus. His car was already parked behind the bus, waiting for us to be able to go. So once I got on the bus, he got in his car and he drove behind the bus, following the route that I was taking when I got off the bus. And I met him there. And I was like, I did it. He did it. I felt so proud. I felt so confident. He trusted me with this. But I also appreciated that he understood that my schedule was really busy. And he came to my games, which was really sweet because he was super supportive. So thank you to him. But I did have a lot of issues in 9th grade. My VI teacher, for one thing, tried to stir up, I guess, trouble for me with my mom. Every single day, without fail, she would call my mom about something, saying that I did something wrong. But the thing that bothered me the most is I have my accommodations, which includes extra time on assignments, extra time on tests, extra time to get to like lunch or nutrition. So I was allowed to leave 5 minutes early from class. I was allowed to either use Braille or large print for my assignments. I was allowed to go back to the VI room if I really couldn't see something, so that I could use the CCTVs, because we were not allowed to take the CCTVs out of the class to go and take to our classroom with us. So one time when I was in my marine biology class, I had asked my teacher if I could go back to the VI room so that I can get help on these assignments. And he said yes, of course. And so I left with my pass and I went to the teacher's lounge to be with the assistant and the other students that were in the VI classroom at the time, because we weren't allowed to go into the VI room itself due to seniors and juniors having testing that day, and the VI teacher had to stay in there in order to look after those students. But because there was an assistant still in the teacher's lounge, I was allowed to go back so that I can receive assistance. So I was sitting there with the assistant doing my assignment, and the Braille teacher, or transcriber technically, because that was her job, not actually being its Braille teacher, but she was the only one who was able to really teach us Braille, because our VI teacher didn't know Braille, really. She was learning while we were learning, and she wasn't even teaching me during my Braille class. She would have me sit down there for a whole entire hour, or however long I stayed in her classroom. And she would put a box in front of me and be like, okay, here, study these. And they were Braille flashcards, and since I'm a fast learner, I went through that box really fast, and I was able to say all of the different words and read them off and everything. I was even able to read them off by order without actually reading what was on them. But the transcriber comes in, and she goes, oh, hi, Daisy, I didn't know you were here. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting help with my marine biology assignment. She's like, oh, okay. But she rats me out to the VI teacher. And she comes back a couple minutes later and she goes, Daisy, the VI teacher wants to talk to you. And I was like, okay, no problem. So I walked over to the VI room, knocked on the door softly so to not interrupt anybody. So she opened it and she stepped out, and she goes, Daisy, like, you need to go back to class. And I was just like, why? I'm getting help and I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not being loud. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm not being disruptive. Nothing. And she goes, you need to go back to class because you're missing lecture. And I was like, I'm not missing lecture. We're not doing anything in the class. If anything, it's free time for anybody to do assignments. And I just can't see the pictures, so I need help. She goes, well, you need to go back to class because you're missing lecture. I was like, I'm not missing lecture, ma'am. And I really tried keeping my cool. And she was just like, oh, like, don't make me call the dean. And I was like, okay, go ahead. was like, I'm really not doing anything wrong. I'm just getting help. Like, it's my right and my accommodation to be able to come back and get help from the assistants or from you. But since I can't get help from you, I'm going to get help from the assistants. She goes, I'm going to call your mom. And I was like, fine, go ahead. It's not like you don't call my mom either way. So I beat her to it and I called my mom because I didn't want my mom to hear her side of the story first and think that I'm in trouble and yell at me when she calls me or when she sees me and be like, why did your teacher call me again? Like, she always calls me, what are you doing? So I called her first to let her know that my rights were being denied. So I called her and she tried calming me down. And she was just like, okay, like, you know, talk to the principal. And I was just like, okay, like, I'll see what I can do. And my friend Kim also had an issue going on with the VI teacher too. But I'm not going to get into her story because that's her story. But basically, we both walked to the vice principal's office together. And we told her our situation, basically. And it doesn't seem to fail. They just didn't want to do anything. They didn't want to fix any of the problems. So they tried helping Kim more than they helped me. They were just like, why can't you just go to the library if you really needed quiet or anything? And I was like, that's not what I need. I needed help. And the only person who knows how to work with me is the assistants in the VI room. But nobody cared because they wanted to keep this VI teacher there since there was no other VI teachers in the district. But she even told us herself that she wasn't supposed to be a VI teacher. She was supposed to be an English teacher. How does that work? So I tried transferring out of that school. They weren't letting me transfer out though. It took 4 IEPs in a whole year to be able to transfer out of that school. But even then, it didn't work. All these different excuses to not let me go. So finally, when my sophomore year came, on the first day of school, we had an IEP set up from last year to do on the first day so that I can get transferred out and start at my new school so that I wasn't missing anything. But again, they had more excuses as to why they couldn't transfer me out, and my mom was sick of it. So she finally cracked and she said, okay, if you guys don't set up one more IEP for next week on Monday in the morning to transfer her out, she's not coming to school anymore. So they set up an appointment and finally they transferred me out. So I remember being so happy. And on that same day, right after I got transferred out and left the school, we drove over to the Valley Academy of Art and Science so that I can enroll there. So I filled out the paperwork and everything at Voss, and they said that you can come to school the next day. And I was like, okay, cool. So excited. So the next day, I walked into the school, got my schedule, they showed me around, we talked, and I went to class. And ever since then, I was so happy. I was the happiest that can be. I had my friends there. In fact, when they were setting up my schedule with me, they go, do you have any friends here? And I was like, yes, I do. My friend Jenny. And they were just like, oh, okay, like, do you want to be in Jenny's class? I was like, yes, I do. But the thing is Jenny is a year older than me, so it didn't work out. But I ended up being in my friend Ozalee's classes, which I loved it. I really did. The only class that we did not love at all was our history class. Our teacher sucked. I didn't even have a chair in that class, guys. Like, no desk, no chair. Just nada. And when he would give me a chair, because it'd be his chair, he would take it back. He'd be like, actually, Daisy, like, I need to use my desk and my chair, like, to do lecture. Do you mind? And I was just like, where do I go, sir? But I just had to be in the corner next to Osley, like, squeezed in, sharing her desk. So, yeah, interesting times, guys, interesting times. Fast forward to senior year, because not much happened during my junior year, besides falling down the stairs 2 different times and spraining my ankle, so I had to use crutches. But while I was at school, I used a wheelchair to get everywhere. But during my senior year, things really took a turn for my vision and for my eye, just in general. In my second semester, I ended up going to surgery on the first day of school to remove my left eye. And the situation behind that was, for a couple months before this surgery, my left eye was really irritated. It was super red. It didn't allow me to have my prosthesis in, which, if you guys don't know what a prosthesis is basically a shell, or there's ones that are like a full eyeball looking, marble looking thing that goes into your eye socket that's supposed to keep your eye from closing, supposed to give protection to your eye. So the shell that I use is only a half prosthesis, which it's just the covering for my eye to go over. Yeah, I wasn't able to have that on because my eye was so irritated. And I've always had a prosthesis. Ever since I was younger, I have always worn a prosthesis. There was even like a record that I was trying to go off of just on my own. There's no actual like a world record for it or anything, but I never wanted to take off my shell because I just wanted to look as quote unquote normal as possible with my two eyes looking the same. But I couldn't wear my shell, so I always had my eye closed all the time. Just so that I can, like, one, protect my eye, but two, like, I just always had it closed. It was just a habit of mine. But my mom started to get mad and would tell me, like, you need to put your shell on, you need to put your shell on. And I was like, no, it irritates me, but I would be forced to and just put a lot of dry eye in my eye, but it just wouldn't help. So we went to the doctors to go get, an opinion as to what was going on, and they had told me that my eye was going to be pronounced dead, that there was just no helping it anymore. So I had two options, which was either get surgery done now or get an injection to put medication into my eye in hopes that the pain will go away. But it was only like a small percentage that the pain will go away. And if it didn't go away and I still decided to get surgery, it was going to be more invasive and more risky, and it was going to hurt a lot more. So I went home that day, talked to my mom about it, and I had decided on my own, because my mom allowed it to be my decision since I was old enough to make the decision, that I would remove my eye, which really frustrated me because I never wanted to remove anything from my body. I always wanted to keep my eye. After I got the surgery, everything just felt so much better. A couple hours after surgery, like the first 24 hours after surgery, I was in deep, deep, deep pain. I had gone to the emergency room. I thought something was wrong. I was really scared. And I had already taken my painkillers for the day, but it just didn't help. So when I went to the emergency room, they said, okay, here, take this other pill. And I was like, okay. They took a look at my eye. They said that there was nothing wrong, no infection, no nothing. They didn't see anything wrong, but they couldn't do anything further because they weren't my surgeon. They said, we'll keep trying to calm down the pain, but if this doesn't work, you're just going to have to go back home, and you're going to have to wait until Monday to be able to see your doctors, because this was on a Saturday night. And after 30 minutes, they came back in and they were just like, so how's your pain? And I was just like, I'm still in pain. But all I could do was just grunt or groan, because I was in that much pain that I couldn't physically speak. So they gave me another medication, which I had to have it dissolve under my tongue. Then when that didn't work, 20 minutes later, they were just like, this is the last thing that we can do, and if this doesn't work, then you're just going to have to go home. So they gave me a shot on my behind. But I went home because I was still in pain, and we set up an appointment for me to see my doctor on Monday. But when I got home, I had passed out from all of this medication, and when I woke up, I was perfectly fine. It was just the first 24 hours, I didn't feel good. So when I went to go see the doctor on that Monday, they said nothing is wrong, that you're perfectly fine, it's just what happens. And I was like, you couldn't have warned me. But I was okay. I missed school for quite a bit of time. I think I didn't go to school until March, but I was still doing school while at home, because our school was mainly technology based. We all had our own iPads, and we had a system where the teachers could post assignments or homework, and If they didn't post it, then they would just email it to me and I would send it back to them through email. After I finally recovered and I was able to go back to school for a little bit of time, I think I only went for like a week or two, I ended up having to go to UCLA to get my right eye checked out with my glaucoma specialist. So when I had gone to UCLA and seen my doctor, he was just like, you need to go into surgery. And I was just like, why? And he had told me that my pressure was severely high. And he had informed me that I technically was supposed to lose my vision 2 years ago because of all of this pressure buildup that I'm having. So I ended up going into surgery to get a tube shunt placed into my eye. And a tube shunt is basically, like it sounds, a tube that goes into the top or the back of your eye that's supposed to drain the liquid out of your eye. So I had gone into surgery, they put it in, I got out of surgery, was in recovery for the week, and they brought me in a week later, and I was in pain whenever I would open my eye. Because every day they would tell me, like, it's okay, you can open your eye, like, you're allowed to open your eye, and I was just like, no, I'm a little too scared. But I finally decided to do it, and I freaked out. All I saw was red everywhere. And I was like, oh my god, I'm bleeding. I'm bleeding internally. I'm gonna lose my eye. But it eventually cleared up and it turned yellow. So little by little I was getting my color back. So it started off with red and yellow, and then it went on to blue, then green, and then I was able to see everything clearly. But whenever I would open my eye, it felt like I was tearing something. I felt like I was tearing my eyelid, or that I was opening up some of my scars or something. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And what they did was they kept opening my eye, forcing my eye open to try to look in the back. Which, I get it, you're trying to find my tube because they had lost it. But they couldn't figure out why I was in pain, and they couldn't figure out why they lost the tube and everything. So I ended up having to go see a bunch of different doctors on that same day. I had to go get an ultrasound done on my eye. Then the next day I had to go get another ultrasound done on my eye, with water being inserted into my eye and then putting something in my eye to be able to look in further. When that didn't work, they ended up sending me to Kaiser to go see a retina specialist who used a red light to be able to see in the back of my eye, and he found where the tube was, and he had told me, like, your eye is in shock, you need to go into emergency surgery now because there's more wrong with your eye than they told you. 1, my eye was in shock. 2, he found the placing of the tube and it was not in the correct place. But 3, my eye lens had flipped and then had gone up to the top of my eye. And that's why I was in so much pain. Your eye lens is not supposed to be flipped and all the way at the top of your eye. So it was rubbing against my eye and rubbing against my lid. So I went into emergency surgery, and he basically saved my life for my eye. He helped me gain back a lot of vision back in my eye, and he had removed my eye lens and gave me a prescription for glasses that I needed to use because now that I don't have magnification in my eye, I need protection from my eyeglasses and to be able to see with that magnification. And he also did some laser surgery in my eye while I was under to save my eye even more from getting any infections or anything that has to do with my diabetes. And all of that was done in April. So as I was recovering from surgery, it was already close to finals week, or at least reaching that time zone. And we also had signature projects due, but if I didn't do my signature project, I wouldn't be able to graduate. So I had to go and get a hearing done to ensure that I would still be eligible to graduate, because I was on the verge of failing my government class, I believe it was, because I think I took econ the first semester and then government the second semester. But my teacher hadn't graded a lot of my work and then just wasn't fully understanding that I was at home recovering. Like, she said she understood, but for some reason it just wasn't working out. She was saying I was missing a bunch of assignments that I turned in, and it was just this whole big mess. So I got a hearing done, and they had canceled my hearing because my VI teacher, he is a saint. He had told them that I was under surgery, so I wouldn't be able to come in, that all of these surgeries are all back to back, and that's why I'm at home so often, and missing school. So they were super sweet about it and they canceled, but they didn't know that I was actually going to come in. I was really dedicated to wanting to finish school. I didn't want to stay another year. That was just not in my agenda. I was like, I'm not doing this again. I'm not staying in high school and doing all of this work all over again. You are crazy. So I showed up even though I technically wasn't supposed to be outside. I was supposed to be bedridden. And when I went in, they were just like, wow, Daisy, like, you're really dedicated. Like, can't believe that you're here. And they were just in such shock. But we explained everything to them. My mom talked a lot. I eventually talked. And they were just like, we totally understand. Like, if you can just, like, show us what you got, we'll basically allow you to graduate and this and that. And I was like, thank you so much. I spent the last month, or month and a half technically, left at school because I was finally able to go back to school. And I graduated with my class, and I was just so grateful for everything. I did get a scholarship from the Visually Impaired Scholarship. If you guys want to go see my speech, it's terrible, but if you want to see it, just type in my name, Daisy Rosales, and then type in VIASF Scholarship, and you'll be able to see me giving a speech. During the summer, I did go to Junior Blind, also known as Wayfinder, the STEP program, to do an internship. Because when I was 17, I did do their Step 1 and boot camp. But then I did the internship in 2018 during the summer. Worked a little bit. Then in 2019, again, I took a whole year break from college and I went out to San Francisco. I decided that I wanted to do the Hatland Center for the Blind's program, which again is basically like the STEP program but far more invasive. I was living in my own apartment with a roommate and we had to split rent and bills, except for bills that were like on the outside. So like my phone bill didn't involve my roommate, little things like that. I would learn how to do finances with my financial advisor teacher. I would learn how to cook, clean, organize, all of that good stuff for independent living skills class. But I learned how to use different technology, and the last class that I was involved in was orientation and mobility, so that I can learn how to travel around San Francisco. Well, learn how to travel around my area, at least in San Pablo. And it was a really fun, great experience. No regrets. After I graduated, though, in October, I had moved back home and I started the process in order to go to school. In the spring, that's when I had officially started my first semester of college. Now, college itself was really hectic for me. I didn't really want to go to school anymore. After I graduated high school, I said, this is it, no more. But that's not how it works. So I continued to go to school. My first semester of college was a hassle on its own. I started with Math 227, which is statistics, one child development class, and an English 101 class, and my psychology 1. I had dropped out of math on the first day because I couldn't understand my instructor. She had a really heavy Asian accent. So I decided to drop that class and I took a second child development class, but it was online instead of in person. And bless my child development professor's heart, she's super amazing. And she was the one who helped advocate for me with the disabilities office. So we're in the process of writing a letter to Pierce's board in order to hopefully get more accessibility for people with visual impairments, because there's a lot for other disabilities but not much for those of us with a visual impairment. When it came to my English teacher, he was not great at working with someone with a visual impairment. I wasn't keeping up with the class as he wanted me to, even though I had informed him to let him know that I didn't want to drop out of the class and if he had any advice for me. And he had told me, don't drop out of the class, don't give up, like, keep going, it's okay. But he had dropped me from his class either way when I hadn't finished reading the book, and I was just like, wow, thank you for the heads up. And this past fall, I did finish English 101. Thankfully, I took a different professor. I did Child Development, Communications 101, and Psychology. Now, this upcoming semester, like I told you guys in my previous video, will be Statistics, Spanish 2, and Child Development. So yeah, guys, that's my story. Thank you for listening. If you guys have any questions, please comment down below any questions that you guys have. Thank you guys for watching. Tune in for next week's video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and bye!